Chinese spies have infiltrated the U.S. and are handing over sensitive information to the Chinese government, or so the headlines would have you believe. We'll talk about this new era of McCarthyism and what it means for regular Chinese people on this week's China Report. Welcome to the China Report, a new show produced in collaboration with Pivot to Peace. Every week, we'll be helping you sort through the propaganda with an independent view of a country that we're taught to hate but know so little about. I'm your host, Amanda Yee, along with my co-host, KJ Noh. KJ, why don't you start us off with this week's headlines?
Sheikh Hasina alleges U.S. role in ouster, says she could have remained in power if she had surrendered sovereignty of St. Martin's Island. The ousted Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, confirmed, as the China Report stated last week, that her ouster was a U.S.-involved coup. Sheikh Hasina, currently in India, accused the U.S. of ousting her from power for not handing over the island of St. Martin for a U.S. military base. Earlier, Sheikh Hasina had told Parliament that the U.S. was pursuing regime change in her country. They're trying to eliminate democracy and introduce a government that will not have a democratic existence. The U.S. supported neoliberal banker Mohammed Yunus, who pioneered microfinance, a method of debt fracking the poor, will lead the interim government.
China moon samples reveal water molecules in groundbreaking discovery, scientists say. Chinese scientists have now analyzed soil samples brought back by the Chang'e lunar probe in 2020 and have found water along with minerals in the soil. Even though NASA and Indian spacecraft have spotted what they believe to be water on the moon's surface in the past, this is the first time it's been found in its molecular form, H2O, in physical samples. More importantly, the samples were retrieved from a part of the moon where they thought water in that form couldn't exist. This type of water could be a potential resource for lunar habitation, the scientists wrote in their study.
Hong Kong court dismisses Jimmy Lai's bid to overturn conviction. Hong Kong's top court has dismissed right-wing media magnate Jimmy Lai's bid to overturn his conviction. The media magnate, often called Hong Kong's Rupert Murdoch, ran the anti-China tabloid Apple Daily as an instrument to incite deadly riots in 2019. He was found guilty of participating in an unauthorized assembly. 2 British judges on the top court resigned in protest. Hong Kong is the only place on the planet where foreign judges sit on the courts of another country, a legacy of its British colonization. The British judges, paid about $40,000 a month, plus a $20,000 a month housing allowance, are not required to speak or understand Chinese. Hong Kong's laws on assembly, national security, and media freedom are much more tolerant than the UK, where even a single offensive internet post can land you in prison. In the UK in 2016, 3,395 individuals, an average of 9 people a day, were arrested for internet postings that violated Section 127 of the Communications Act.
Could stomach cancer be spotted early with a drop of blood? A Chinese team has an idea. Using AI algorithms, Chinese scientists have developed a detection model using blood samples capable of identifying early-stage gastric cancer. According to a study published in academic journal Cancer Science in July, the simple test achieved nearly 90% accuracy in identifying gastric cancer. In China, over 80% of gastric cancer cases are diagnosed at an advanced stage, and the 5-year survival rate is below 30%. But if detected early, the survival rate can exceed 90%. Gastric cancer is the world's 5th most common cancer and 4th leading cause of cancer deaths globally.
Taiwan man granted divorce after wife turns marriage into pay-per-view for sex and other interactions. A court in the province of Taiwan granted a divorce to a husband after the wife charged him $15 every time for sex and even conversation. The husband, Hao, had filed for divorce after his wife, Xuan, began charging him a fee for physical intimacy and verbal communication. Taiwan province has one of the highest divorce rates in Asia. In a different case in 2014, a wife charged her husband $60 for sex and additional fees for conversations and meals. Taking after their mother, the couple's children then also demanded payment from their father whenever they talked.
China accuses U.S. group National Endowment for Democracy of ideological infiltration. In a new lengthy report released Friday, China's foreign ministry has accused the National Endowment for Democracy, or NED, of, quote, subverting state power in other countries, conducting ideological infiltration, which includes funding anti China forces in Hong Kong and separatist forces in Taiwan. The NED is funded by U.S. Congress with the stated aim of supporting, quote, democratic struggles everywhere, but is often called Washington's regime change arm. It funds overseas groups, unions, and institutions. According to the report, the NED funded projects in Hong Kong which totaled $310,000 in the middle of anti-government protests in 2020. This is in addition to $30 million the Senate appropriated for secure internet systems in Hong Kong in 2021. The report also accused the NED of working with Taipei's ruling Democratic Progressive Party to, quote, mobilize democratic forces to open up the front line of democratic struggle in the East and advance the false narrative of Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow. The report also stated no country is in a position to lecture others on democracy and human rights or use democracy and human rights as excuses to infringe upon the sovereignty of other countries, interfere in their internal affairs, and incite ideological confrontation. And now to our main story. Well, it seems like every few weeks we have some kind of sensationalist headline about Chinese espionage or Chinese agents who've infiltrated the US and are sharing sensitive information with the Communist Party of China. It really feels like we've entered a new era of McCarthyism, and we can't discuss McCarthyism in the 21st century or the new Cold War on China without explaining one of its weapons of choice. What's called the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA. FARA is a U.S. law ostensibly aimed at curbing foreign influence in politics and requires what they call foreign agents, that is, those who engage in advocacy or lobbying on behalf of a foreign entity, to register with the Department of Justice, periodically disclose their activities, and comply with a lot of their extensive reporting requirements. If you don't do that, then you're subject to prosecution, fines, and even jail time. However, FARA is written in such a sweeping, broad manner that it lends itself really easily to interpretation and lends itself really easily to political weaponization as well, which is what we've seen in the past few years as more and more Chinese agencies and individuals are smeared as being foreign agents or spies for China. To discuss this, we're joined this week by a very special guest, Julie Tang. Julie is a retired judge in California. She was born in Hong Kong and emigrated to the U.S. in 1967 with her family. She's also the co-founder of Comfort Women Justice Coalition, which educates the public on the history of the Japanese military sex slaves during World War II. And the group has also since built a memorial to these comfort women. In 2020, Julie co-founded Pivot to Peace, which advocates for peaceful relations between the U.S. and China. Julie, welcome to the China Report.
Thank you, Amanda, and it's such an honor to be here. And hi, KJ.
Well, Julie, there's a lot to talk about in terms of FARA, but first, maybe how do you understand the application of FARA to various cases in the current moment? As a judge, how do you see these cases and how it's applied today?
Amanda, you're very right when you said that FARA is a very ambiguous and a piece of legislation that seeks to nab people who are basically representing a foreign government, but who are living in the United States. And unfortunately, the actual application has been far removed from its original purpose. Let's look at what FARA requires. The two main elements of FARA requires, number one, an agent of a foreign principal, right? And how do you become an agent? An agent works under the direction, request, or control of a foreign principal. And what kind of activities are they conducting? And that is political activities, activities that would promote interests or advance the concerns of a foreign entity. Now, for those two elements, they have to be met in order to make out a case of a foreign agent. But it is so grayish, such a grayish area that always takes precedence when it comes to napping somebody, and there's no threshold. On one hand, FARA requires somebody who is actually a paid agent, somebody who took money from a foreign government, who acts in the direct interest and supervision of that foreign government. Okay, I can understand that. All right, they need to register, because they're getting paid for what they're doing. But on the other end of the spectrum, they're talking about people who are actually trying to influence public opinion or otherwise seeking to advance the foreign interest by just simply communicating or talking about those issues. And that directly intersects with the right of freedom of speech, right of freedom of association, and right of freedom of assembly. And oftentimes it's in those three areas where people expressing themselves, communicating to the public for the interests of both countries, of supporting peace and stability between the two countries, that they are being arrested for agency. There are two cases that we are familiar with. They've been going around for a long time. One happened in about 2020 when a Chinese Tibetan ethnic person who is a citizen of the United States, who was in the Marines and who became a police officer, was accused and charged by the federal prosecutors as an agent of the People's Republic of China. I don't know the details of the case. I've not read the history of the case. I've not gone into the case as I would as a judge or an attorney. But from what I read, generally represented is that he was trying to arrange banquets, for the people in the consulate. And he was trying to engage socially with the U.S. consulate and promote the relationship between the Chinese community and the Chinese consulate. I don't know how he got himself into doing that, but allegedly he was doing that. And for that, he was charged with failure to register as an agent, as somebody as defined under the FARA, agent of a foreign principal who act at the request, direction, control, supervision of a foreign principal and to advance the foreign interests in the United States. And these are political interests. These are very murky, ambiguous terms of art that only a judge or a jury can arbitrate and to determine what they are. But by the time when it gets to that level, this person is totally sunk. He's out of a job, as this Tibetan police officer was. He lost his job. He was suspended without pay. And he was also besmirched, his reputation. He spent 6 months in jail and only to have the case all of a sudden dismissed. All right, the case was dismissed. In the interest of justice. Again, in the interest of justice is a term of art in and of itself. It could mean several things. And from my experience, it means basically two things. One, there's not enough evidence to pursue a trial against this guy. Or another situation is the person has served the entire term of custody while waiting for trial. That's either equal to or more than the term that he would otherwise get if he were convicted and sentenced by a court of law. And I've seen those things happen in my court because of the dereliction of a prosecutor or the neglect of the defense attorney. And it's very shameful when that happens because people unnecessarily spend more time in jail without even having been convicted of a crime. So those are the two instances that I have seen are the basis for dismissal in the interest of justice. In this case, DOJ refused to give a reason. No reason given, all right? So we will never know. And maybe the defendant doesn't even know either because the defense attorney was very bitter about that situation. He was very angry that the Tibetan officer, I think his name is Mr. An Wang, wasted all his time, resources, and only to get a dismissal in the interest of justice. He's still fighting for his job. Another case is a hotel worker. He is he's a part of the labor movement. He was active in that. He too, like Mr. Anwang, wants to promote interest and support between the Chinese community and the Chinese consulate office. So he went between those two and engages in some kind of a relationship. Whatever allegation that is, they found there was enough to prosecute him. And now he is facing trial. So we'll find out what's going to happen in that case when it goes to trial. But what my concern is that these are all for the interests of national security. And national security is to protect the people of America. And instead of protecting the people of America, we are prosecuting our American people themselves for on cases that have very little evidence and also that have no threshold to determine guilt or innocence, but only at the prosecutorial discretionary power are these people brought to face a criminal charge, as you said, Amanda, that involves term of sentence in custody as well as a fine. So the direction of the national security is something that we really need to question as ordinary citizens. And this agency law, whether it is used correctly, appropriate or not, we shall see. But so far, we have not seen very good results from the exercise of this prosecutorial power. A case was dismissed, another languishing, and there are other, and actually, if you look at the history, from 1966 to 2000, only 6 or 7 cases of FARA had been filed. But now, under the auspices of the U.S. China Cold War, these cases are now happening once too often. And also, the department is also making a statement that we will pursue FARA cases under FARA more diligently now than ever. What is the purpose of that? Is that really for national security? Or was it for intimidation and persecution of his own citizens, for containment of China, for a purpose outside of American domestic issues and policies? And someone called it weaponizing, or someone is saying exploiting, or prosecutorial discretion. And all these things really should be taken into consideration when we as citizens look at what government is doing.
Absolutely. And you did a really nice job of explaining how innocent individuals often get caught up in the crosshairs of these initiatives like FARA, and how, FARA, it's a very broadly written law that's like very broadly applied. And just because it's so broadly written, it can easily be folded into this new Cold War on China. Another program that I wanted to talk about is this, what's called the China Initiative. And it's also been used as another weapon in these kinds of McCarthyite witch hunts. The China Initiative was a program introduced by the Trump administration that was used to go after a lot of Chinese scientists and Chinese academics. Could you explain a little bit more about, what the China Initiative was and how it affected Chinese scientists in the U.S.?
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned this program because following the FARA case, this case is also a failed program, another misdirected national security initiative that acts only to harm its own citizens and not to do anything to protect America as a country from national security threats. As a little bit of a history, in 2018, U.S. Department of Justice unveiled this program called China Initiative, a project under Donald Trump. And it was supposed to crack down on trade secrets, thefts, and things like that. And FBI Director Christopher Wray made it very clear. He said that Chinese Americans in this country are part of the whole of society threat on Chinese espionage, and it requires a whole of society response. And that's what he's saying. You see the oversweeping net casting of all Chinese as spies and doing espionage. Okay, leave that without further discussion on that. We will get back to that a little bit later on the effects of that on Chinese American society. Over 3 years of investigation, over 150 defendants, and at least 77 cases, the China Initiative secured, guess how many convictions? Take a guess, Amanda.
I know it's
150
very
defendants?
low.
Okay, give me a number.
I think 23.
I'm sorry, you're wrong, Amanda.
Is it lower?
One
Oh,
conviction.
okay. One conviction.
So how effective are we in our national security? How good are we protecting our public? None at all, except to harass, persecute, not just prosecute, but persecute these Chinese scientists to the point where 50% of the Chinese scientists that were interviewed in a study conducted by the Committee of 100, I think it was done sometime in 2022, said that they were afraid that they were under surveillance, were living under fear constantly, and they were considering leaving the United States elsewhere in the world. And actually, this comports with another poll conducted by the Monmouth University in March of this year. 34% of U.S. citizens expressed their interest to settle abroad if given a chance. Now, this group of people is different from the Chinese scientists. Okay, these are just ordinary people who are, who just feel despair, with what they see in happening in this country. And then another survey by the publisher International Living found that 65% of 2,700 respondents stated that they're firming up plans at a quicker pace to leave the country due to vitiated political climate. I'm just throwing in all these groups now from different directions and to take a look at where we are in our governance at this point. Are we meeting the people's needs? How come 23% of the American public does not trust our government? And I'm not being an agent, of any country when I'm making this statement. I'm being a very loyal American citizen because I care for this country. If I don't care for this country, I won't be standing here talking as I do, as KJ Noh, as Amanda Yee are doing. We care about this country enough. We want to prevent wars on our own people and wars with other countries. But this is the response of the people. They are saddened. And the Chinese scientists who were persecuted, their lives were gone. I mean, there Franklin Tao, who recently had his case reversed. He was the last case tried under China Initiative. He would have been the second person convicted had the Court of Appeals not reversed his case just 2 months ago. And what the Court of Appeals give for the reason for reversing that case is not because they like Franklin, all right? It's because there was insufficient evidence to support the crime that he was allegedly committing. And by the way, not only did the China Initiative fail in that regard miserably for failing to convict, they also failed to protect. And these are the things that we really need to pay attention to. Now, these are the failings, I think, of these programs. But as I said, the pain and suffering caused by individuals permeated beyond them as persons, as families. It permeated throughout Asian American society. Because as Chinese Americans, we all live in fear of what next, what is going to come next. Mindful that there are people who are fighting back too. There's an instance in which Sherry Hu was prosecuted, charged with a crime, and only to be dismissed again under the China Initiative for lack of evidence. She went back and sued the DOJ and won a $1.5 million settlement. She works for the Commerce Department. She's a weather woman. She tested temperatures and things like that. She does research, and she was accused of being a Chinese spy for doing things for China. And later on, when the prosecutor found out that they did not have sufficient evidence. In fact, she was illegally, irresponsibly persecuted. They immediately dismissed the case again without any stated reason. So Sherry decided to sue the DOJ. Took her 10 years from the time that she was followed, surveilled, and put on charges to the day that she got her $1.5 million settlement. It took her 10 years out of her life. And I know her personally, and she told me, she said, I'd rather not have that money at all. Who needs that kind of money? It's not worth it for my pain and suffering. And again, as you were saying, the McCarthyism aura, it is permeating the Chinese community. Discouraging Chinese scientists from staying in this country is very bad for this country. We are at a very critical moment in history and in time where we need to cooperate and get the best technical support and cooperation with China, especially because they are equal to United States in the technological advancements and other countries on issues of climate change, pandemic, and things that we ordinary Americans need to ensure for our protection. But these are things that are being stripped away because the misdirections of the national security issues.
Julie, these FARA prosecutions and the China Initiative program, they're used to target and harass Chinese American individuals, clearly, but they're also part of a government-wide effort to attack China. We could consider them as part of this hybrid warfare, one dimension of which includes military encirclement. Another aspect is sanctions on technology to cripple China's economic development. Another is information warfare and propaganda campaigns against China, telling lies about China. How do you feel has this U.S. foreign policy on China, has it contributed to the overall atmosphere of anti-Asian hate in the last few years? And has this atmosphere of China bashing, has it affected you personally? Has it affected people you know?
Oh, definitely, no question about that. Starting with the U.S. China Cold War, beginning from the Obama period, then on to Trump's era, the anti-Asian hate crime rose over 1,000%. It is a very scary and horrified period for Chinese Americans. Because we have a very unique role in America. We're American citizens. We are very loyal to this country. We vote. We speak out on issues. We participate in democratic process. But we also have a deep love for our own mother country, which is China. And these two devotions are not in conflict. You can love two parents, right? You love your father and you can love your mother. When you come into this country, you become a citizen. It's like an adopted child. You become the legal child of that parent. And that's where Chinese Americans are. But at the same time, if you found your biological parents, you can love them too. You can establish a relationship. In fact, Chinese Americans are the best bridge builders to promote relationship between United States and China. And we are being underutilized by the government because they're so overwhelmed with the fear and suspicion of Chinese Americans. They rather prosecute us for neighborless crimes and on failed programs rather than utilize our resources to promote and support a peaceful relationship between the two countries. And to that extent, the way I look at it is that when United States and China are at odds, Chinese Americans as well as other Asian Americans are on the front line, battle line, getting shot at. And if the relationship between United States and China are in good terms, we are the first beneficiaries. And that's why so many of us work on peace, to promote peace between the United States and China. But we also have to be honest. And we cannot just say that, both parents have done good things, and let's both parents work together. We do that because that's diplomacy. But we have to also call things where they are. And you're absolutely right about the US Cold War and confrontation on China. It has been one sided for a long time and still is. You look at China's position, they are very accommodating. And they're very, you can say they're playing Tai Chi, okay? When you play Tai Chi, it's a very slow movement, but you also has a way to prepare yourself, stabilize yourself, to push back the enemy at the time that you need it. United States play boxing with a one knockout punch. And those kind of games are being played out right now. The one knockout punch has been aggressive, punches, utilizing all these strategies that has gone nowhere. That's the problem. The trade war, Kamala Harris said it, is a failure. She's changed her words since, but it is a failure, the trade war. It continues to be a failure. But they're still doing that 100% tariffs on EVs, where consumers like myself can buy a really nice car, a reasonably priced car, and drive it around and enjoy a new experience of a new EV, a luxurious car, no less than a Mercedes-Benz, for a very good price. But really, just going back to the anti-Asian hate and the effects on Chinese Americans, we as a group of people have been affected the most and most vulnerable to issues of U.S.-China confrontation. And we wanted so badly for all these things to stop, but we also understand that there's just so much power behind this kind of movement. The elites have so much power, the military-industrial complex, the Silicon Valley moguls, the financiers, the think tanks, the neocons that control these think tanks are also engaged and so powerful with their money. Even the president doesn't have enough power to push back on the issues and policies. And that means Chinese Americans have to work harder to protect ourselves, to keep educating the people about who we are and our dilemma and our position, what we can do for this country, and promote peace between the two.
Julie, I just wanted to pick up a little bit on what you said about Asian hate and how it has affected Asians here, people here. And, I know that all of the Asian women in my workplace have been assaulted or threatened for being Chinese, although they're not Chinese. If you remember in San Francisco last year, a young Asian teen had his throat slashed in broad daylight on a bus. This was completely unprovoked. In February 20th of last year, a young Asian woman, a young girl, a Miao girl, she was chased, gang raped, and beaten to death. Her skull was smashed in. This is Ely, and one of her assailants said, "I love raping, CHINKDITCHES." And, this is just one of many, many cases. There was also the pregnant mother, Ina Kwan. She was a Korean woman. She was shot 4 times at a traffic stop. She was pregnant at the time. They were not able to save either the mother or the baby, but there wasn't even an attempt at robbery. It was simply a pure hate crime. In New York, there was Guyang Ma. She was an elderly Chinese woman. She was sitting, minding her own business, and she had her head bashed in with a rock, and she subsequently died. There was also Eva Liu. She was a young graduate. She had gone on a graduation vacation to Germany. She was stalked, and then she was killed by an American tourist. And of course, I'm sure we all remember the Asian spa shooting in Atlanta, where 6 Asian women, 6 out of 8 of the casualties were Asian women. And there's a kind of an absurd or surreal quality to this. First, in that none of these issues are recognized as hate crimes. It's very, very rare that they're charged as hate crimes. In the case of Aaron Long, who killed, the people at the Asian spa, he said that he was killing them because they were temptation, that he had a sex addiction, and that that they were a form of temptation to him. Just a kind of an absurd statement. It would be like somebody shooting up a deli because they had bulimia. But we see this kind of extraordinary escalation of hatred against Asian, especially against Asian women and against elderly Asians. And I guess my question to you is, first, do you feel safe? And second, what is something that we can do about this? I mean, it's so prevalent, and we know that this comes from the top down. You cannot initiate a wholesale campaign of Asian hatred against Chinese over there, against Asians over there, without some of it trickling down and blowing back against Asians over here. So, what can we do about this situation? And do you yourself feel afraid for your safety?
In answer to your last question, I do. I do feel unsafe walking around. I look left and I look right, and make sure that I don't get suddenly attacked by somebody. I am more conscious of my Asianness now than I have ever been before, and even with my friends, when I talk to them, it's unless they are people who really understand and are highly educated and read a medley of articles and publications and willing to extend beyond what the mainstream media is feeding on them, they are all very negative towards China. 83% of Americans have a disfavorable view of China, and I think another 50% said that they actually would be willing to fight China or something like that. It is a very dangerous time that Asian Americans, especially Chinese Americans, are living in this country. And how did this country deteriorate to this level? What has it been doing that caused somebody like me, who came to this country in 1967, who felt that this is a really great place, had a nice 40 years run when U.S. China relationships were doing well, when there's panda hugging rather than panda slugging. And how did we so quickly deteriorate it so fast? The propaganda has succeeded in many ways in the US. And the propaganda that are embedded with lies about human rights violations, and everybody just chimed in, yeah, human rights, without really looking or judging for themselves. What is the basis of pointing a finger at China's human rights when we're doing worse things with the with the Indians, genocide? And what are we doing in supporting genocide in Gaza? What are we doing in continuing supporting more fight in Ukraine rather than diplomacy and working it through, reduce the tension? We're not doing anything of that. We are a warmongering country, one battle after another. As if it's not enough, now we're even taking on China. It's crazy. The Pentagon did their own war games, showing them all except for one, which they made up, I think, that show that China would win that war with the United States over Taiwan. And why are we interfering in foreign issues that are not ours? What is the purpose? I think, first of all, people have to really try to ask themselves that question. And KJ, if we keep posing that questions to our friends, to people who are like the naysayers or the non-believers, what does it have for you? All right, for us to take our weapons all the way to Taiwan and to fight for the Taiwan people. Taiwan people don't need to fight. They need to peacefully work things out with China. And a good example is Hong Kong, all right? Hong Kong is a place where I'm from, so I think I'm more qualified than most people to talk about Hong Kong. the issue always said, oh, Hong Kong freedom and democracy. Those two words are used so much, it become like a mantra, like, okay, or God bless America. They don't even think about it, they say it. What does that mean? What does freedom and democracy mean for Hong Kong people? Hong Kong has more freedom and democracy than any other cities in this world. In fact, the Freedom Index put Hong Kong as number one, both in freedom and in democracy. That was before the 2019 riots. However, after 2019 riots, China and Hong Kong has to adopt the national security law. And for that reason, now they reduced it, the index down a little bit by a couple of notches. Still, if you go to Hong Kong, whose democracy is being violated? Whose freedom is being restrained? Nobody. But still, they're talking like that. It is lies like that. Xinjiang, oh my goodness. I'm going to Xinjiang in October. I'll be bringing back pictures. And I was in Xinjiang 10 years ago. I know a lot of people in Xinjiang. If Xinjiang has the kind of genocide and imprisonment of 2 million people that they said that there were, you would see refugees rushing out of Xinjiang across the border to the nearby places. Not one person has rushed out of Xinjiang, except those few dissidents who are now paid by NED, who could not even prove that when they got their passports, there was a time that they claimed they were in prison, okay? All these lies, the real genocide is in Gaza, okay? Not in Xinjiang. If people can just even understand fundamentally, that's what's going on. And if people just go to Hong Kong and taste the freedom in Hong Kong and the democracy, whatever they mean by democracy. Democracy to me means living, eating, health requirements, and my security and my stability, my sense of peace is assured. Not that I can cast a vote, okay? That is a wrong understanding of democracy. If democracy means just vote, you don't have democracy. Really, you don't. In California, we know who our candidate is. Our electoral voters cast a vote for us. We don't cast a vote. And 4 states, 4 or 5 states control who's going to be our next president. That's what it is. That's where the billions of dollars are spent in those states. So KJ, we are we are a small actor here. We can only share what we know and sincerely, honestly, and use the facts to present to our listeners what they are. And if they dispute the facts, go and look it up yourself and find out what's happened. Go to Xinjiang, go visit Xinjiang and make a trip there and find out for yourself what's going on. And
Anybody can visit, yes. It's wide open.
Yeah.
Anybody can visit.
Yeah.
Hundreds of millions of people visited, yes, last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Julie,
you can
I'm
see people. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just say you will, we just have to keep educating people, KJ. And education is important, very, very important. Asian people value education more than anything else, all right? And that's why they go overseas to study, they get their degrees. And that's why China has the smartest kids in the world. They always win all these math contests. Education of the public. We can do so much, but whatever little we will do. And that's how we will overcome all this negativism that is being spread as a result of hegemony, ambitions, and also the interest of a few overcoming the interest of the majority.
Well, Julie, I'm so glad that you brought up the genocide in Gaza because as we see it, continuing over the last 10 months, it's naturally led to a rise in Islamophobia. And just like how the U.S. keeps escalating the new Cold War on China, that's naturally going to lead to further harassment and further persecution of Chinese Americans in the U.S. It's just a matter of fact. And even though people will try to separate U.S. foreign policy from these attacks, they're naturally linked. But Julie, thank you so much for coming on the China Report. We're so glad to have you, and we hope you come back again.
If you invite me, thank you so much.
It's always an open invitation.
You guys are doing such a good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Well, speaking of the new Red Scare, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to move into our next segment. Every accusation is a confession. Last week, we covered the Olympic Games and we had a great discussion about the double standards that Chinese athletes are subjected to versus their U.S. counterparts. And as we discussed, allegations of doping cast a shadow and a lot of skepticism over the Chinese swimmers' stunning performance in Paris. Well, just a couple of days after we released that episode, Reuters published this bombshell story, which said that between the years of 2011 and 2014, the U.S. anti-doping agency allowed several U.S. athletes who had violated anti-doping regulations to continue competing in exchange for serving as undercover informants for other violators. So after this Reuters story came out, the World Anti-Doping Agency released a statement in response to that story. And in this statement, it said that despite claims that USADA made about WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, despite the claims that they had made about WADA signing off on the practice of athletes violating doping regulations, serving as undercover informants, WADA, in fact, did not know at all about this practice and did not sign off on it. And the statement also said that WADA had not been made aware of this practice of using informants until about 2021, which is a full decade after this had started. And once they found out, they told USADA to stop this practice immediately. The statement also said that they were aware of at least 3 different athletes who were allowed to continue competing despite these doping violations. One of these was an elite level athlete who had competed all the way until retirement. And this athlete had admitted to taking steroids, among other performance enhancing drugs. And they even competed in Olympic qualifier events and competed in international competitions. And also, all this information was never made public because USADA informed WADA that if it was made public, then all of their athletes' qualifications revoked, it would present a really high-level security risk for these athletes. So KJ, before we end the show, I just wanted to get your overall thoughts on this bombshell that Reuters dropped this week, just a couple of days after we recorded our last episode.
Well, I think it's exactly as you say, Amanda. It's that the accusation is a confession. It's not, it's so obvious and blatant in this situation. The United States accuses China, which has been shown to be clean in its multiple excessive testing that athletes were subjected to from daybreak to midnight. And they were tested 4, 5, 6 times more often than other athletes. They came out completely clean. And the US and the BBC and the Western media have continued to lodge accusations that the Chinese were doping. And then it turns out, first, as we pointed out in the last show, not only are US athletes using therapeutic use exemptions, that is, they're doping under, quote, medical conditions, and they have therapeutic use exemptions 600 to 900 times more often than athletes from other countries, 600 to 900 times higher than the Olympic average in general. And then to top that off, it turns out, according to this report, that US USADA was allowing doping. It was simply closing its eyes to the doping, and it gives us the pretext. Well, they were helping us catch other people who were involved. Well, we don't know that. We haven't seen any proof of that. Everything has been covered up. And Reuters says that it was only from 2011 to 2014, but we don't know that for a fact either. These are only the cases that have come to light. So I think what's clear is that USADA has been allowing US athletes to dope. It has been covering up that doping. And then it has been leveling charges against other countries, in particular China. And that is a level of hypocrisy that is just so extraordinary that I'm astounded that both USADA and the Western mainstream media continue to bleat excuses and continue to make accusations when they really do not have a leg to stand on. It's just really, really extraordinary.
It's a stunning level of hypocrisy, as you say. And, when it comes to the US smearing China, it's like we always say, every accusation is a confession. We'll see you next week on the China Report. That's all the time we have for this week.